Noela, she's just a warehouse worker. My father said it so casually that for half a second, I wondered if I had imagined the cruelty in his voice. I hadn't. 6 people sat around our dining table. 3 of Dad's business partners, their spouses, my younger sister Vanessa, and me. Dad stood near the head of the table with a glass of wine in his hand, smiling like he had just delivered a harmless joke. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward her plate, but not before I caught the smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. One of Dad's partners, Marcus Hale, looked uncomfortable. I thought Noela worked in logistics, he said. I do, I replied. Technically, I work in. Dad laughed and cut me off. Please, Noela, stop pretending to be successful for once. The room went silent. This was his house, his dinner, his business partners. And tonight, apparently, I had been invited to serve as the disappointing daughter, standing beside the daughter he was actually proud of. 5 minutes earlier, Dad had spent nearly an entire conversation praising Vanessa. She just got promoted, he had announced proudly, corporate strategy. 28 years old and already moving up. Vanessa had smiled modestly. Then Marcus had made the mistake of asking, and what does your other daughter do? Now everyone knew exactly what Dad thought of me. I could have argued. Instead, I smiled. Okay, Dad. His expression shifted slightly. He had expected resistance. My phone vibrated beside my plate. I glanced down. Interview confirmed. Another message appeared seconds later. Broadcast begins at 8, then a third. Board approved final announcement. I turned the phone face down. Dad mistook my silence for humiliation. You know, he continued, looking toward his guests, Noela always had big ideas. After college, she thought ambition alone was enough. Eventually, life teaches you differently. Vanessa gave a small laugh. She's still mysterious whenever anyone asks what she does. Honestly, it's embarrassing. I looked toward the television mounted on the wall. 7:58 p.m. Dad noticed. Expecting someone important to call. No. I lifted my glass. I'm waiting for something. That earned another laugh from him. Dad turned back toward his partners and began discussing the logistics industry. His favorite subject, because he had owned Bennett Regional Logistics for more than 20 years. The biggest headache now is these technology companies, he complained. Every startup thinks it can reinvent warehouses with some software. I kept my eyes on my plate. Marcus didn't. He was staring at me, not rudely, more like someone trying to remember where he had seen a face before. You said your last name was Bennett? He asked. Vanessa frowned. She's our sister, of course she's Bennett. Marcus barely heard her. He studied me for another second, then reached slowly toward his phone. Before he could type anything, the clock changed. 8. The television shifted automatically from financial headlines to the evening business program. A presenter appeared behind a polished studio desk. Coming up tonight, she announced, an exclusive interview with the founder behind one of the largest logistics technology deals of the year. Dad continued talking. Marcus stopped completely. I lifted my eyes toward the screen. The presenter smiled into the camera. After months of secrecy surrounding the company's leadership and investment negotiations, tonight we'll finally meet the person behind the technology transforming warehouse operations across the country. My phone vibrated again. I didn't touch it. Across the table, Marcus looked from the television to me. Dad was still smiling, still unaware that the daughter he had just called a warehouse worker had been waiting for this exact broadcast all evening. And there was only one question left hanging over that table. Why? Earlier that evening, before the guests arrived, Mom had caught me near the kitchen doorway. Noela, please, she said quietly. Whatever happens tonight, don't argue with your father. I looked at her. I wasn't planning to. He has important people coming. They're discussing a possible expansion with his company. I almost laughed at the irony. Don't worry, Mom. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. She gave me a relieved smile. What she didn't know was that my own career was about to change publicly that same night. And unlike Dad, I had no intention of announcing it at dinner. I really had worked in a warehouse. That part of his story was true. Years earlier, after college, I took shifts at a distribution center while trying to figure out what I wanted to build for myself. Dad hated it immediately. You went to university for this? He had asked the first week. To him, the warehouse uniform meant I had failed. To me, it meant I was finally seeing how the logistics industry actually worked. I watched workers lose hours because inventory records didn't match what was physically on the shelves. I saw trucks delayed because information moved slower than the products themselves. Supervisors used outdated systems. Suppliers called constantly because no one could confirm what had arrived. Employees wasted entire shifts correcting mistakes that software should have prevented. One night after work, I opened my laptop and started writing down everything that frustrated me. Then I started sketching solutions. That became a routine. Shift, dinner, laptop, sleep, repeat. Dad saw only the uniform. Vanessa saw only that I wasn't climbing a corporate ladder like she was. Neither of them ever asked what I was building. Before dinner that night, Dad had found me alone in the hallway. He lowered his voice. Tonight matters to me. I know, so I don't want you exaggerating whatever little project you're working on. When people ask what you do, I stared at him. Dad, when was the last time you actually asked me what I do? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I waited. Finally, he shrugged. I know enough. No, you don't. You worked in a warehouse. Then you started talking about some startup idea. After that, everything became secretive because you stopped listening. His jaw tightened. Don't turn this into something dramatic. I asked you one question. I said I know enough. That answer told me more than anything else could have. He didn't know. Worse, he didn't want to know. Because if I had actually succeeded, then the story he had told himself about me for years would collapse. Vanessa walked into the hallway while we were still standing there. Nothing, Dad said. Vanessa looked at me. Let me guess. Noella's career again. I didn't answer. She leaned against the wall. You know, you could just admit things didn't work out. I looked at her. And if you're wrong? She smiled. Then prove it. For 1 second, I almost did. My phone vibrated. I pulled it out. A message from my legal team filled the screen. Reminder, investment announcement remains under embargo until broadcast. Do not discuss publicly before air. I read it twice. Then I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Vanessa folded her arms. Well? I met her eyes. Not yet. She laughed. Dad shook his head and walked toward the dining room. That's exactly what I mean. Now, sitting at the dinner table minutes later, I watched Marcus discreetly unlock his phone. He typed something, paused, then typed again. His expression changed. The casual curiosity disappeared. He stared at the screen for several seconds before slowly raising his head. And this time, when Marcus Hale looked across the table at me, he wasn't looking at a warehouse worker. He looked like a man who had just discovered something my family still didn't know. Marcus kept staring at me. Then he leaned slightly forward. No, Layla, are you connected to a company called Trust Me, Marcus? Dad interrupted. You're giving her too much credit. Marcus turned toward him. Dad didn't notice the warning in his expression. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, apparently pleased to have another opportunity to explain my life for me. You should have heard her a few years ago, Dad said. She was convinced she was going to reinvent warehouse management. One of his partners glanced at me. Dad continued. She'd come home from those warehouse shifts carrying that laptop everywhere, always talking about inventory systems, tracking problems, automation. I told her that running a real logistics business is a little more complicated than having ideas. Vanessa laughed. She practically slept with that laptop. Vanessa, Mom murmured. What? It's true. Vanessa looked toward the guests. Then eventually she stopped telling us anything. Every time someone asked how the project was going, suddenly everything was private. Dad smiled. That usually happens when people start asking for actual results. Nobody laughed this time. Marcus placed his phone beside his plate. Richard, what was the project called? Dad shrugged. I don't remember. Some technology name. Marcus looked at me instead. Was it Axion Grid? For the first time that evening, Dad stopped smiling. Vanessa's expression changed too. Axion Grid, she repeated. Why does that sound familiar? I held Marcus's gaze. Yes. Dad looked between us. Yes, what? That was the name of your little software project. Yes. Marcus sat back slowly. Dad gave a dismissive laugh. Well, there you go. Mystery solved. No, Marcus said. I don't think it is. The room quieted. Dad frowned. What does that mean? Marcus tapped the phone line beside him. Action Grid isn't some abandoned software project. Vanessa straightened. Marcus continued. My company reviewed their platform earlier this year. We were considering adopting it for 2 of our distribution centers. Dad's smile vanished. One of the other partners turned toward Marcus. You mean the inventory optimization system? That's the one. Now everyone was looking at me. Dad recovered quickly. Well, she probably helped with an early version. Marcus ignored him. Noela, did you work on the system that predicts inventory movement between distribution centers? Yes. And the supplier integration? Yes. Another partner leaned forward. How did you solve the mismatch problem between incoming shipment data and warehouse counts? We lose hours on that. I glanced at the clock. 8:03. I had to choose my words carefully. We designed the system around what warehouse employees actually encounter instead of what software engineers assume they encounter. If the information coming into the platform doesn't reflect what's happening on the floor, automation just makes the wrong information move faster. Marcus nodded immediately. Exactly. Another guest asked, and what about delayed supplier updates? I answered that too. Then another question came, and another. Within minutes, Dad's business dinner had changed. The men he had invited to hear his expansion plans were asking me about warehouse technology. Dad tapped his fingers against the table. Finally, he interrupted. Everyone is getting carried away. Marcus looked at him. Dad pointed vaguely in my direction. Whatever she helped with, don't confuse that with running a real company. Noela has always wanted people to think she's more successful than she is, my mother whispered. Richard, enough. But Vanessa laughed. Exactly. Stop pretending, Noela. I looked at her, then at Dad. Neither of them understood why nobody else at the table was laughing. I checked the clock again. 8:04. Marcus slowly put down his glass. His eyes settled on my father. Richard, Dad turned toward him. Marcus nodded toward the television. I think you should stop talking until you see what's about to come on that television. Dad stared at Marcus. What exactly is that supposed to mean? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. The television did it for him. We're interrupting our scheduled market analysis, the presenter announced, for breaking news involving logistics technology company Axion Grid. Every conversation at the table stopped. Dad slowly turned toward the screen. This Axion Grid name appeared behind the presenter. Vanessa put down her fork. The presenter continued. Axion Grid began as a warehouse efficiency project designed by someone with first-hand experience working inside distribution centers. Dad's eyes moved toward me. On television, footage showed warehouses, loading bays, inventory scanners, and workers moving shipments through distribution centers. The original system was designed to address problems its creator witnessed personally: inventory discrepancies, shipment delays, outdated tracking processes, and poor communication between suppliers and warehouses. Vanessa's face changed. Those were the exact problems I had spent years talking about. The problems Dad had dismissed as my little project. Marcus leaned back without taking his eyes off the television. Dad reached for the remote. Anyway, we don't need this blasting during dinner. Marcus put his hand over the remote before Dad could pick it up. Leave it. Dad stared at him. These were Dad's guests. This was Dad's house, but nobody wanted the television turned down. For the first time that evening, he wasn't controlling the room. The presenter continued. After rapid expansion and adoption by major distribution operators, Axion Grid has completed a significant new investment agreement. A number appeared on the screen. Vanessa inhaled sharply. The deal places the logistics technology company's valuation above $1 billion. Dad froze. $1 billion, one of his partners whispered. Marcus nodded. Dad looked at me, then back at the television, then at me again. No. It came out quietly. Vanessa leaned forward. Wait, this is the same Axion Grid? Yes, Marcus said. Dad shook his head. That doesn't mean anything. Nobody responded. He pointed toward me. Lots of people work for these companies. I said nothing. Maybe she worked on the software, he continued. Maybe she was part of some early team. That doesn't mean. Richard, Mom said softly. What? She looked at me instead of him. My phone vibrated. I glanced down. One message. We're live. I placed the phone beside my plate. The presenter's voice continued. For months, one major question has remained unanswered publicly. Who is actually behind Axion Grid? Dad stopped moving. During confidential investment negotiations, The company's founder largely avoided publicity, with senior executives declining requests for detailed profiles. Vanessa turned toward me. Noela. I looked at the television. The presenter continued. Tonight, following completion of the investment agreement, Axion Grid's founder has agreed to her first major televised interview. Marcus already knew. I could see it on his face. Dad was beginning to understand, but he was still searching for another explanation. She could still just work there, he muttered. Nobody answered him. The studio image disappeared. For half a second, the screen went dark. Then the recorded interview began. A woman appeared seated across from the business correspondent. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Mom went completely still. Dad stared at the screen as if he had forgotten how to speak, because the woman sitting in that television studio was me. The presenter's voice filled the dining room. Meet the tech world's newest billion-dollar CEO. Every person at the table turned toward me. Noela Bennett, founder and CEO of Axion Grid. The words came through the television clearly. Nobody at the table moved. Dad's hand was still resting beside the remote Marcus had stopped him from picking up. Vanessa stared at the television, then at me, then back at the television. On screen, the interviewer sat across from the recorded version of me. You started Axion Grid after working inside a distribution warehouse yourself. Yes, I answered on the screen. That experience was where everything started. The segment moved through the story my family had never bothered to learn. I had worked warehouse shifts. I had watched inventory records fail to match what workers could physically see. I had watched shipments sit unnecessarily because systems didn't communicate. After work, I had opened my laptop and started designing a better way. The first version was rough, then small operators tested it. Their results brought larger clients. Larger clients attracted investors. Expansion followed. And now, after months of confidential negotiations, the latest investment agreement had pushed Axion Grid's valuation beyond $1 billion. The warehouse job Dad had used to prove I was unsuccessful had given me the problem that built my company. The interviewer asked the version of me on television, "Why do you think Axion Grid has connected so strongly with warehouse operators?" I watched myself answer, because we started by respecting the people who actually understand the problems. The people working with these systems every day usually know where they're failing long before anyone sitting in a boardroom does. Marcus smiled. Then he looked at me. Congratulations, Noela. Thank you. Another partner followed. That's extraordinary. Then another. Nobody congratulated Dad. He cleared his throat. Well, we all looked at him. He forced a smile. Obviously, we always knew Noela was ambitious. I finally spoke. No, his smile disappeared. You didn't, Noela. Less than 10 minutes ago, you told everyone at this table that I was pretending to be successful. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Dad glanced toward his partners. That was obviously a misunderstanding. It wasn't. Vanessa finally found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. I tried. When? For years. She shook her head. You never said you were running a billion-dollar company. It wasn't a billion-dollar company when I started trying to tell you. That silenced her. I continued. I told you about the warehouse problems. I told you I was developing software. I told you I was building a company. Eventually, every conversation became a joke, so I stopped having the conversation. Dad frowned. You could have been clearer. I asked you tonight when you last asked what I actually do. He looked away. You couldn't answer. Marcus broke the silence. I think I know why her name looked familiar. Dad turned toward him. Marcus continued. We've been discussing modernization for months, Richard. Several of our competitors are already moving towards systems like Axion Grid. One of the other partners nodded. We've talked about their platform ourselves. Dad's face tightened. Marcus glanced toward the television. The person you've spent dinner dismissing is leading the exact technological shift we've been telling you we need to understand. No one needed to add anything. Dad had invited these men into his home to impress them with his knowledge of logistics. Instead, he had mocked someone whose company was changing the industry right in front of them, his own daughter. Dad suddenly looked at me differently, not warmly, calculatingly. Perhaps there's an opportunity here. I knew exactly what was coming. He leaned forward. Bennett Regional already has the facilities and client relationships. Axion Grid has the technology. We should discuss some kind of partnership. As family? I asked. Of course. Why wouldn't we? I almost smiled. Any proposal from Bennett Regional can go through Axion Grid's normal corporate process. His eyebrows lifted. Noella, I'm your father, and Axion Grid has employees, executives, investors, and procedures. I won't bypass them because you're my father. So you treat strangers better than your own family. No, I treat you by the same rules as everyone else. Vanessa gave a bitter laugh. So now you think you're better than everyone. I turned toward her. No, that's how you're acting. Success was never supposed to be a competition between us, Vanessa. She crossed her arms. You're the one sitting there proving everyone wrong. Because you demanded that I prove it. She went quiet. I continued. Dad praised you by putting me down, and you enjoyed it, but I never needed you to fail for me to succeed. Dad pushed his chair back slightly. Enough. You sat here knowing what was coming on television and allowed us to embarrass ourselves. I stared at him. I didn't tell you to call me a warehouse worker like it was an insult. His mouth closed. I didn't tell Vanessa to laugh. Vanessa looked down. And I didn't tell you to announce to your business partners that I was pretending to be successful. The room was silent again. I just stopped protecting you from being wrong. I stood. Dad looked up. Where are you going? My executive team is waiting for me. We have meetings after the broadcast. For once, he had nothing dismissive to say. I picked up my phone. Then I stopped. I don't want this to destroy our family. Mum looked at me. Dad said nothing, but things are going to change. I looked first at him, then Vanessa. If we're going to have a relationship, you don't get to humiliate me when you think I'm unsuccessful and suddenly become proud of me when strangers decide I'm impressive. Dad lowered his eyes. Respect can't depend on my job title. Then I left. In the weeks that followed, the interview traveled far beyond that dining room. Action Grid received calls from new clients and industry partners. I began appearing publicly more often, but the way I ran the company didn't change. I still visited warehouses, I still spoke to supervisors, and I still asked workers what wasn't functioning before I asked executives what they wanted to buy. Dad had consequences of his own. His company survived. I never wanted otherwise, but the partners at that dinner no longer treated every opinion he offered as unquestionable. The story of him mocking the founder of a billion-dollar logistics company while complaining about technological disruption became an uncomfortable reminder of how badly confidence could distort judgment. Weeks later, Dad sent me an apology. There was no request for investment, no introduction, no partnership proposal, just an apology. I accepted it. I didn't pretend one message repaired years of being dismissed. Trust would have to be rebuilt through what he did next. Vanessa contacted me too. Our first conversation was awkward, but I made one thing clear. I don't want to beat you, Vanessa. She looked confused. I never did. For years, Dad had created a family hierarchy where her success seemed brighter when mine looked smaller. I refused to participate in it anymore. Months later, I stood inside one of the warehouses that had tested an early version of Axion Grid. A young employee approached me after a meeting. I heard you actually used to work warehouse shifts. I did. You don't mind people knowing that? I looked across the floor. Workers moved between shelves, while scanners fed information into a system that had once existed only as notes on my old laptop. No, I said. Why would I? That warehouse uniform had never made me a failure. Working there had taught me things no boardroom could have taught me. The billion-dollar valuation hadn't made me worthy of respect. It had only made it impossible for my family to keep ignoring what had been true long before the television announced my name. They told Nolela to stop pretending to be successful, but when the television finally told the truth, the only people pretending were the ones who had spent years pretending they knew who she was.